a tax collector, one who collects tax for the Roman Empire, and he was doing his duty. When we see a tax collector or a publican is none other than a servant of the government, and how they work for them, and a publican is one who also in a way makes money, commission. In anything they have a commission. So when they collect tax for the Roman Empire, they would collect and they would say, if I collect this much, you must give me 10% of what I collected. And they would say, well, very good, if you collect that, it's fine, and we will give you 10%. And when they get little collection, the 10% would be less. When there is a good collection, maybe in the first week of the month, there would be good commission for the tax collectors. And we know that Mathew is a very stern man. He is a very sharp, very calculative, and was in a way a person who could really know by face, you did not pay for 3 months. You did not pay for 5 months. So he would catch them. Even as they passed by the tax collector's office, he would remind them, hey, next week you have to pay. You know why? Because he wants to get his commission. And people hated them. They hated them because they were known as blood suckers. They would be sucking their blood, especially when there are people who are very poor. Now, for example, even the fishermen. The fishermen will get very less income, and they had to pay. And when they had to pay, it was very tough for them. And that is how they would always see that these bloodsuckers were sinners. They would always harass people and make people feel very embarrassed in public. And being a publican, he would not be pardoned. He would meet them in any get-together or in a synagogue and say, you did not pay the tax, you have to pay, because he will get his commission. As a person who gets commission, he was more interested to earn and make money. But his plans were not really true. God had his own plans for him. Jesus passing by, he said, follow me. And this man just left everything and followed. Left the office means he left what he was collecting, he left what commissions he had, he left everything and followed Jesus. This is something unimaginable for a publican and a tax collector. What really mesmerized this man for leaving the office, and maybe he would be suspended because very unruly and without any information to the authorities, he leaves and goes and then does not come back. And just imagine what would happen to him. But he's more bothered about Christ. And what he does, he gives him a dinner. And when he gives him a dinner, the Pharisees, who are supposed to be very good men, would call all these tax collectors sinners. Therefore they say, why is your master eating with sinners? Therefore, even the Pharisees, who were notorious fellows, they would not spare the tax collectors, and they would say they are publican, they are sinners. And when we celebrate this feast of St. Matthew, we celebrate because of his second phase of his life. How he becomes a follower, and how he was a true apostle for Christ. And after the ascension, we do not know what happened. All that we know is he sat down to write in detail about Christ. And therefore, he is put as the first gospel because of his very meticulous writing. All the parables that he describes is something very beautiful. Why? Because he was more interested in seeing Jesus Christ, who has come to bring the kingdom of God. And therefore he finds that Jesus, the Messiah, the long-awaited Messiah, brings the kingdom of God. And therefore all his parables are all connected to the kingdom of God. The first part of the gospel, we see 5 chapters of the sermon of Christ. That is the Sermon on the Mount. And how he made a clear study of what Jesus preached. Those must have been just 2 or 3 days preaching. But he puts it into 5 chapters to give us the entire detail of Jesus' instructions to his disciples, to his apostles, and to the people. And therefore Jesus performs miracles. And the miracles that Mathew describes are very, very touching, because Mathew, being a tax collector, would very clearly follow all that is there in healing of Christ. And that is how he describes the healings of Christ, the miracles of Christ. And finally, Mathew, who was a person who knew that there would be so much of suffering in life, brings in the passion of Christ more clearly in a very lengthy manner. And he explains the entire crucifixion of Christ in a very detailed manner. This shows that Mathew wants to give us the entire story of Christ in his gospel. When he wrote his gospel in Aramaic, he was a very powerful person, because he was liked by the Aramaics, the Greeks, the Latin-speaking people, because he could understand all these languages. And being a tax collector, he would converse with them in their own language. And they would feel happy to come to Mathew, not just to pay the tax, but to have a conversation with him. Therefore, he must have been a good friend as well to others. And that is why his entire gospel is a friendly gospel for us. We find that Mathew was ready to die for Christ. As an evangelist, he went out to preach boldly and died for Christ. Today, my dear friends, we have a lot to learn from Matthew's gospel. Whenever you read Matthew's gospel, remember that he touches our hearts.